As it happened, there was a woman from Ontario who came to PEI. She was really involved in early childhood in Ontario and also in the organizations that supported early childhood. She talked to us about the benefits of coming together and all of the things that could happen when people shared, when they worked together, and when they moved forward together. So what we did was that there were 4 or 5 of us who got together, and we went to centers, and we with her, and she did tell all of the advantages and so on, and but there was very little uptake. We persevered. Gradually, there were more and more people saying, well, I kind of like the idea. And then we brought people together from around the province who were sharing things that, they were doing. So that was the beginning of kind of setting up to have an organization that would represent us.
The legislation had only come in 1974, so people were still, it was something new that, there were going to be some regulations around this, but at that time, there were no regulations yet, and nobody knew what that would be. In fact, one of my very first meetings for the ECDA was in the summer of '75, and in those early years, there were a lot of meetings with people gathering in Charlottetown with government people talking about the potential of the regulations and what it would entail. And primarily the regulations had to do with how many children could be in one place, how many adults had to be present for the number of children. There was no discussion on qualifications or curriculum or anything like that.
One of the things that we did early in the days was we established a lending library. So they would rent out pieces of teaching aids. They would rent out, we did have a jungle gym. They would rent out all kinds of things for a period of time to use at their center and then bring it back, and then it would be available for somebody else. So that was really successful. It gave some legitimacy to helping each other out as opposed to keeping everything to ourselves.
Because there was no funding until the mid-'80s, so back in the early days, it was very difficult for people to purchase the kinds of equipment that they wanted to have in their programs. So this equipment library allowed people to introduce something new, but it was all shared and it was owned by the ECDA. So it was those kinds of things that the ECDA introduced that really kept bringing people together. The ECDA's role has evolved from the early days in the 70s, when there was just a real focus on how are we going to survive this, what will the regulations look like. And there was, in the early 70s, there was no subsidy program for parents. There were 6 centers across the island that were completely funded. And it was not until toward the late 70s that government decided that they would no longer fund those 6 programs completely. And instead they would take that money and they would create the child care subsidy program. So that changed things across the island, because then families, regardless of their income, no matter where they lived, that they had access to some supports to be able to attend some programs. But the ECDA has always had a really strong relationship with the provincial government. And I think that has been beneficial in 2 ways, both for the ECDA and for government. The other way that PEI is a bit different than other provinces is that PEI has always, in their civil service and for people responsible for the delivery and regulation and monitoring of early childhood services, PEI government has always had people with an early childhood background. And so they knew what they were doing, and they knew what it was like to be in the sector. And I can recall, somebody in the department saying, well, we should ask the centers to do this, and being able to say, that will never fly. That's impossible, and here's why that's impossible. And informing each other as to how things needed to progress, what's needed, what's possible. And so the ECDA has been very responsive to the changes in the sector all through those 50 years. And when there were finally some qualifications introduced, I remember the debate within the provincial government was, if we're going to introduce some new regulations, which would be a better approach? Should we put something in around the qualifications for people who are running these programs, or should there be a curriculum so that we can ensure that the program is well thought out and well delivered? And I can remember lobbying within government to say, you can create the most perfect program in the world, and if somebody comes in who doesn't know how to implement that program, that's a waste of time. But if you have people who are qualified and they understand how children learn, how children develop, they can develop their own program. They can make something happen with scarce resources because they know what they're going to do.
I graduated from Holland College and had a variety of experiences after that. And eventually decided that I would open my own center. And it was so rewarding. It was amazing. The challenge, though, became the staff coming and going. And the challenge of that staff turnover was it was significant. And I was involved with the ECDA as a volunteer at that time, and was involved with the Wages and Working Conditions Committee, is what it was called. And despite all the work that our committee was doing and all of the great things that ECDA was, trying to put forward, the reality of it was, within the center, I was still being faced, as were other operators, with that staff turnover. I would often ask the staff sort of, what was it that was kind of pushing them towards another path? And often it was wages, but a lot of times it was the recognition too for the work, that they felt like they could contribute more somewhere else. And just about at that same time came an opportunity through the Early Childhood Development Association. It was their advertisement for their first executive director, and I thought, that is so my dream job, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do that. All I've done is, operate center. That is not my wheelhouse. And it must have worked out because I got the job. I really took that passion for ensuring that the world understands the importance of the work early childhood educators take on every day.
So when I joined the sector 18 years ago, the wages were low, benefits minimal. Centers were not closing for conferences. There was lots of good things happening, a lot of child-centered planning, a lot of family engagement, but I think overall, low-key, educators were just feeling undervalued for the work that they did.
When kindergarten was shifted into the public school system, and when that happened, there was a lot of uncertainty across the early learning and childcare system. So once again, the ECDA sort of picked up and rallied the troops and brought everyone together to say, okay, how are we going to handle this? This is a significant amount of funding to be lost from our system. And although the 5-year-olds are going to be shifting into public school system, we also have the heat and the lights and so on to still cover for the infants to 4-year-olds. So how are we going to ensure that we have what we need to keep going as a system? And really there was a small group of really articulate, strong, well-informed folks that came together to approach this in a very calm, systematic, very professional way, and began to have both private and public meetings in their communities to talk about what it might mean if they lost their child care center. And I really feel that that was another tipping point in our system coming together to stand together strong over, I mean, it was seen as a pretty difficult situation, but in the end, because we came together and stood really strong, a lot of, I mean, I won't go through all the steps, but a lot of really good came from that, because then we had an investment into what we now refer to as early years centers.
I would say, hands down, one of the most beneficial and largest advancements in our sector since I began was the Preschool Excellence Initiative. The creation and implementation of the framework, huge, highlighted the important work that we were doing, educated parents and the public on the importance of the early years. It created a minimum standard, I feel, for the quality of care that we're providing for Island children.
When I was a student at Holland College in the early childhood program, it was really important for our learning managers that they felt it was very important for them to have us participate with the ECDA, and meetings were actually held in our classroom at that time. And in one of those meetings, it was talked about the importance of professional learning and how, you know, lots of ideas being sort of flown around the room at that time around how we could provide professional learning opportunities for early childhood educators, and just becoming increasingly difficult to want to take evenings and weekends and so on to do training. And I remember, I can almost picture in my mind what everyone was even wearing in the room at the time. And I had suggested that we should just implement PD days, and that we should have professional learning days just like other professions do during the workday. And that idea wasn't really received too warmly at that moment in time. And many years later, then, when I was fortunate enough to be hired as the executive director with the association, it was one of the first things that I thought, okay, I have to figure out how to make this happen, because early childhood educators deserve to have this time set aside in their calendar to be able to invest in their professional learning. So then on went the pursuit to create professional development days for early childhood educators. And I do know that at that time we were the only province in Canada that was able to offer 3 provincial PD days during the calendar year, during the workday.
So for me, the advancements in the professional learning have a lot to do with the ECDA conferences. I enjoy them very much. I usually am probably the first people to sign up, because I want to make sure I get the courses I want. I have enjoyed every conference I've taken, all the courses. There's such great learning for teachers and how to equip our children better too. I've taken a lot on self-regulation and that kind of thing. And I've also, the networking with the other educators is wonderful. I've met so many people who I've connected with outside the conferences as well, and kept those connections going. So that is one thing that I definitely love about the advancements from the ECDA. It's just the continuation of the ECDA conferences every year. So.
I feel as though there were a great many humans that came before me that have created the field of early childhood on PEI, that advocated, that raised the importance, and I had the opportunity to work on the floor for many, many years. And now I am so grateful to be able to spend time at the ECDA. I feel like I've met the most wonderful people. It is a privilege to be able to represent our sector and to have really important conversations and to highlight the important work that is being done.
When you asked me in the beginning what was the sector like when you first entered, there were low wages, there were no benefits, there weren't any sick time or sick days. And, you know, I feel like we did what we did because we loved it. And on goes, decades of time, and now I just feel so privileged to be coming from the association where, I had a real deep sense of the importance of wages and working conditions for early childhood educators, and then the good fortune to be able to come into this position and still be able to work on all the same things, and to be able to work with the association to launch a pension program is very significant, and probably one of my proudest moments of all of this work, actually. I feel that if somebody had have asked someone 50 years ago where we would be in early childhood, I don't know if we could even have imagined that we'd be where we are now.
I'm so proud of what the ECDA has done and what we've become. We are a movement. Our advocacy and perseverance drive growth. I love watching ECEs take ownership of not only their learning, but their profession, what they want it to look like, and how they want to work together to continue to grow. From network meetings to conferences to community connections that go far beyond, I can't wait to see what the next 50 years look like.